So we'll start our session today on a downer. I've got some nonfiction DVDs. 2 are really great and happy, and I really loved them. 2 are very intense, and I also really like them. The first one is called Tower, and on August 1st, 1966, Charles Whitman got into the clock tower of the University of Texas campus, and he shot a number of people. Tower is an animated film that talks about the people that were affected by this. Whitman's not mentioned at all in the movie, and that I kind of like that. And it's very interesting how they did the animation and the live action interviews, and they caught a lot of the people who were affected by this just before they died. So this was 50 years ago. So to catch all of these people, it's a really, really good film, and it's very intense. Not something to watch probably with your kids, even though it is animated, but it is something that is pretty historically accurate and also very interesting. So Tower, I would recommend that one highly. Another one I would recommend, but again, it is intense, is Newtown. There's a whole range of conspiracy theorists out there who are saying that Newtown never happened. Well, this is the story of the people for whom Newtown happened. A couple of families are profiled about their efforts to change laws so that people don't do what happened in Newtown. And if you don't know what Newtown was, several years ago, a disturbed individual went into an elementary school and shot up the kindergartners and the first graders and the second graders. And this is a story of, again, the parents. It's about the people who were affected, not about the person that did this. There's a documentary, a PBS documentary about the person that committed this crime, but this is about the city and about the people that live there and the effects of that. So, Newtown. And this was on PBS a couple months ago. It's very powerful. So I recommend 2 music DVDs. The first one is Gimme Danger, the story of Iggy and the Stooges. Now, Iggy Pop, I love him. I just love his personality because I think he's cool. Jim Jarmusch, whom many people know, a director, very well-known director, took on the story of the Stooges. And he, Jim Osterberg, who is Iggy, interviewed for most of it, and all of the people that were primary players in the Stooges. Again, several of them have passed away since this was filmed, so it's very good to have these records. And just for the last 10 minutes where Iggy goes off on some of the stuff about growing up in Michigan, worth watching the whole thing. It's a really good documentary. Another person whom I like Frank Zappa a lot. I did not a huge fan of his music except for Joe's Garage, but a lot of people love Frank Zappa's music. A lot of people love Frank Zappa as a pioneer and revolutionary. And this is a biography told in his own words. And there's several of these out there that can be really good and really bad, but this is a very good one. Just stuff from the 60s, stuff from the 70s, stuff of time of the PMRC hearings, and then stuff from when he knew he was dying. And those are the poignant interviews. And he knew everything was coming to an end. And he had some very relevant things to say. It is too bad that the Zappa family has now kind of gone into a state of pieces because of an estate. His wife died a couple years ago. The 4 children are now fighting over the estate, and it's too bad because a lot of Frank's stuff is said through his music. Musical genius he was. And there's early appearances when he was like 15, 16 years old that are on here that are really cool. So I recommend this. It's called Eat That Question, Frank Zappa. Okay, so we've got some fun stuff here because it's summer, and well, some people partake in adult beverages. This is a fun book. It's called The New Bloody Mary, and most of these recipes can be made without alcohol, but you know, if you do indulge, they're kind of cool. I didn't know there were so many Bloody Mary recipes, but of course the Iowa City Public Library would have a book about Bloody Marys just for you. I really recommend it. The one on the cover with the bacon, very good. And I tested some of these, and we didn't film that, but I did test some of these, and I do recommend this book. So it's called The New Bloody Mary. Another book that I just discovered when I was looking through the stacks, it's called In Julia's Kitchen. And this is a story about Julia Child's kitchen. You know, you write a book about anything. It's absolutely fascinating about how her kitchen was and how she entertained and how she brought the film crew finally into her kitchen in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Her kitchen is now in the Smithsonian Institute, and you can visit it. It's one of the natural American something exhibits. It's in that wing of the Smithsonian. Very fascinating about her and about her TV, and also how the TV shows worked. It also highlights several TV chefs like Jacques Pepin and his kitchen at home and his kitchen on the set and what they need to do for that. It's not a very big book, but it's really, really entertaining. And if you like kitchens, or you like Julia Child, or you like PBS and those kind of shows, it's worth a read. Okay, we got a bunch of Kennedy stuff out there because we are in the 100th anniversary of JFK's birth. The first one is called Jackie's Girl. And this is written by one of her assistants who came to her employ in 1964 when she lived in New York City. She was an Irish immigrant. It's more her story about being an Irish immigrant than it really is about Jackie. But there are some good moments about how the staff were fighting with one another, and that's always kind of fun, the insider thing. She stayed with Mrs. Onassis until I think it was 1973 or so, just before Aristotle Onassis died. He died in 75. But it's an insider story. She stayed close to the family and was very close to John until his death in 1999. So it's an insider, and talking about what happened when, you know, it was in New York, and then they went to Hyannis, and so I like these insiders. There's not too many from the Kennedy family because they do have to sign non-disclosures, but there are a few out there. Torn Lace Curtain, one of my favorite books about the Kennedys, written by the Rose Kennedy's chauffeur. But Jackie's Girl. It's basically her story about coming from Ireland and going back to Ireland, but I recommend it. One of the fascinating things, and I'm not a big assassination buff, I'm more about the Kennedys before the assassination, but Alexandra Zapruder wrote a book called 26 Seconds, and I thought it was about the Zapruder film, but what it's really about is her search for her grandfather. She was born the year he died. Abraham Zapruder was a merchant in Dallas, worked in downtown Dallas. His building was not far from where the Kennedy motorcade was going to go on November 22nd, 1963. So he took his new little Super 8 camera, and went out there, and he actually filmed the actual assassination. There has not really been a book written about Zapruder, and there still hasn't, because this was more about this young woman's looking for her grandfather and trying to understand, because he became famous. He also suffered a great deal from what he saw, as did anybody who was really involved closely with that car. I mean, if you've read Clint Hill's books, you know how he was affected by it. But I think that it's interesting. It's not something I will put on my recommended list, but if you have something else to read, I'd say read that. This is more about just somebody looking for a family member who happened to be famous. So it's okay. Now, JFK. This is a book that came out on JFK's 100th birthday. And it is edited by Douglas Brinkley. You may know him from television. He's a television historian. He's also a historian in New Orleans at college down there. And Stephen Kennedy Smith, who is JFK's nephew. And that's Ambassador Smith's son. And he is a Harvard professor. And they put together Kennedy's speeches with a modern take on them. And it's really an interesting read. And some of the people that offer their opinions on this are Jimmy Carter, Maureen Dowd, Dave Eggers, Chris Matthews, John McCain, Elizabeth Warren, who else is it? Richard Goodwin, who, if you know Doris Kearns Goodwin, this is her husband, and he's a professor too. E.J. Dunn, Robert Dallek, Dick Cavett, a whole bunch of people, and very fascinating. Even Kissinger has an article in here about one of the speeches. But they take a speech of JFK's and then they bring it back to today. Still relevant, JFK was. How ahead of the time was he? So my final book, and I'm going fast today, my first job here at the library 30 years ago. That's right, this is my anniversary year here at the library, 30 years. Yeah, I'm really young. I was in their teen program. I'm kidding. Anyway, my first job here was record cleaner. And so I cleaned vinyl albums and had to take the cleaner and a swabby and wipe them down before we put them back out for circulation. Well, when we got rid of the vinyl collection around 1990, 91, somewhere in there, I purchased several of that collection. But what I purchased were the comedy albums. And one of the best things I ever got was the comedy of Mort Sahl. Mort Sahl is still working today. He's in his late 80s, maybe 90 or so. He still works. He still has a lot to say about society. He is not abrasive in terms of being insulting or using foul language. He makes you think. And Mort Sahl has always made people think. And he's gotten into a lot of trouble for making people think. But the other thing that this book is really good about is setting up the scene of when Mort Sahl was popular. Those little nightclubs, the Hungry Eye and the Broken Spoke, and those kind of nightclubs where comedy and folk music and the Beat generation, and then in the 1960s, and it runs concurrent with Mort's life and how he presented himself. And he did not do a lot of TV. He did Jack Parr. He didn't do a lot of. I don't think he even was on Johnny Carson. I'm not sure, but he's really. A lot of people peg him in the 50s, and he went on in the 60s. He became obsessed with the Kennedy assassination, and that sort of lost him a lot of his people. But then during Watergate, he had a surge of popularity. About 20 years ago, American Masters did a profile of Mort Sahl, and I don't think it's in print anymore, but if you can find that, I'd recommend to watch that. But this is a really good book because it not only talks about Mort Sahl, and the guy has had quite the life, and as with any biography, you find out things that you didn't know, and you're like, oh, how did he do that? Well, how did that happen? And he really did pave the way for a lot of people. If you like Bill Hicks, I would say, go back and listen to some Mort Sahl, because Mort Sahl, political, on top of things, point of view, maybe not consistent, not like George Carlin, because I think Carlin in the latter years of his life got really bitter and was very judgmental about everybody. He was curmudgeonly. And Mort Sahl isn't bitter, and he's got a perspective that is very fascinating. And he was coming up at the same time that the Smothers Brothers and Cosby and Woody Allen were doing stand-up. He did political stand-up, and that can sometimes get you. Not quite like Lenny Bruce, but more political. And again, a very fascinating book, and also captures the time that he was at his most popular. So that's it for summer. I hope you all will look at these books and come into the library and find something that you might like, because we have tons of new things and we have all kinds of stuff going on this summer. So please come in the library, and if you see me, just say hi. Thanks.